Hands on the hood. Now, you people always get loud when you're guilty. The command ripped through the quiet afternoon as a gun hovered inches from Calvin Brooks's back, steady and impatient. Rough hands slammed him forward, grinding his chest into the hood. Metal biting through his coat, like obedience, had to be forced into his bones. "Stop resisting!" the voice snapped, twisting his arm higher and ratcheting the cuffs tighter, even though Calvin didn't move. Calvin kept his eyes forward, breath counted, shoulders still. They didn't know the man they were pinning down was one call away from ending everything they stood for. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Calvin Brooks checked his watch as he stepped onto his front porch, the morning sun warming his face. The folder he carried contained grant paperwork for the youth mentoring program, documents that needed signatures by noon. His brown overcoat sat perfectly pressed over his white dress shirt and blue tie, a professional appearance he'd maintained through 20 years of community work. The quiet suburban street stretched before him, lined with neat lawns and American flags hanging from front porches. Kids' bicycles lay scattered on driveways, testament to the neighborhood's peaceful routine. Calvin inhaled deeply, appreciating the crisp autumn air as he started down his walkway. A patrol car crept into view, moving slowly behind him as he walked. Calvin kept his pace steady, though his shoulders tensed slightly. He'd learned long ago to stay calm when police appeared, no matter how routine the encounter might seem. The engine suddenly roared to life. Tires crunched against asphalt as the patrol car surged forward, the sound shattering the morning quiet. Calvin's heart jumped, but he forced himself to keep walking. One measured step after another. Car doors flew open with metallic screams. "Stop right there!" a voice commanded. Calvin froze mid-stride, his fingers tightening around the folder's edge. Two officers emerged, Brent Klein and Ross Maddox, moving with practiced aggression. Their boots scraped against pavement as they spread out, weapons appearing in their hands with frightening speed. Both guns aimed straight at Calvin's chest, unwavering. From her front window, Linda Sutter stood watching. Her face bore an almost eager expression as she peered through lace curtains, hands clasped at her chest. Calvin caught her gaze for just a moment before focusing back on the immediate threat. "Hands where we can see them!" Klein shouted, his voice sharp enough to slice through steel. Calvin slowly raised his palms, still holding the folder. His heart hammered against his ribs, but his voice remained steady. "Officers, what's going on?" "I'm just heading to an appointment." "Shut up and drop the folder," Maddox barked, edging closer with his weapon trained. Behind her curtain, Linda Sutter's lips curved into a thin smile. Calvin carefully lowered the folder to the ground, movements deliberate and slow. The grant papers inside represented months of work, but right now they meant nothing compared to staying alive. "I'm complying, officers. Please tell me what this is about." "Turn around!" "No, stop! Get on your knees!" Klein rapid-fired commands, each one contradicting the last. "Hands on your head! Face down! Don't move!" Calvin's mind raced to process the conflicting orders while keeping his body still. Sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the cool morning air. 20 years of navigating situations like this had taught him to move with exaggerated care, to speak softly, to make himself as unthreatening as possible. "I'm following your instructions," he said calmly, though his throat felt dry as sand. "Please, just tell me what's happening." Officer Maddox circled behind him, boots crunching on fallen leaves. Calvin fought the instinct to turn his head, keeping his gaze forward and his hands visible. His legs trembled slightly from holding the awkward position. "Someone reported a suspicious person," Klein sneered, gun still aimed center mass. "You match the description." Calvin's stomach clenched. He knew exactly who had made that call and why, but arguing would only escalate things. "I live here, officers. I'm just walking to an appointment. My ID is in my coat pocket if you'd like to see it." "Did I tell you to speak?" Klein's voice rose sharply. "Keep your mouth shut." Maddox moved closer, his presence a looming threat behind Calvin's back. Without warning, the officer grabbed Calvin's right arm, twisting it roughly behind him. The sudden movement threw Calvin off balance. He stumbled, trying to keep his footing while maintaining his calm demeanor. "Officer, please, I'm not resisting." "Stop resisting!" Klein roared, his voice echoing down the quiet street. The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Linda Sutter pressed closer to her window, drinking in the scene with undisguised satisfaction. Other curtains began to twitch along the street as neighbors peeked out, drawn by Klein's shout. The peaceful morning had shattered into something ugly and familiar. From her front porch across the street, Joan Pritchard emerged silently, phone already raised. Her arthritis-gnarled fingers were steady as she pressed record, capturing every moment of what was unfolding. Her doorbell camera blinked its silent red light, collecting evidence that would soon become vital. Calvin remained still despite the pain shooting through his twisted arm, despite the guns still pointed at his chest, despite the knowledge that this moment could end his life if he made the slightest wrong move. His tie fluttered slightly in the morning breeze, the tie he'd chosen so carefully to look professional, respectable, safe. None of that mattered now. The grant papers scattered across the sidewalk, caught by the wind. 20 years of careful living, of following the rules, of keeping his head down, all of it blown away just as easily as those papers. But Calvin kept his voice level, his movements minimal, his dignity intact. Even as Maddox's grip tightened painfully on his arm, even as Klein's finger tensed on the trigger, he refused to give them the reaction they wanted. From his painful position, Calvin watched Officer Klein's boots scrape against the pavement as the officer circled him like a predator. The morning sun caught the barrel of Klein's gun, still trained steadily on Calvin's chest. Every breath felt dangerous, every slight movement a potential trigger. "I said, stop resisting!" Klein's voice carried down the street, deliberately loud, performing for an audience that grew with each shout. His free hand shot out, grabbing Calvin's wrist and twisting it upward at an unnatural angle. Pain exploded through Calvin's arm and shoulder. His knees buckled involuntarily as white-hot agony raced through his joints. Still, he fought to keep his voice steady, dignified. "Officer, please, I'm complying. I'm not resisting anything." "He's fighting!" Klein announced to the neighborhood, twisting harder. "He's resisting arrest. Maddox, help me control him." Officer Maddox moved with practiced efficiency, his movements suggesting he'd done this dance many times before. His hands locked onto Calvin's shoulders from behind, fingers digging into pressure points that sent fresh waves of pain through Calvin's body. "Stop moving," Maddox commanded, though Calvin hadn't shifted an inch. "I'm not," Calvin started to say, but Klein cut him off. "Shut your mouth!" In one violent motion, Klein shoved Calvin forward while Maddox pushed from behind. Calvin's chest slammed against the patrol car's hood, the impact driving the air from his lungs. The metal felt burning hot against his cheek in the morning sun. More sirens wailed in the distance, drawing closer. Up and down the street, curtains twitched as neighbors peeked out at the spectacle. Some filmed with phones. Others quickly drew their blinds, choosing not to witness what was happening in their peaceful suburb. Linda Sutter emerged from her house, phone clutched dramatically to her chest. She took small, theatrical steps down her front walk, her face arranged in an expression of exaggerated fear. But her eyes gleamed with satisfaction as she watched Calvin being forced to the ground. "Officers!" she called out, voice trembling with false concern. I'm so glad you responded quickly. I was terrified when I saw him walking around our neighborhood. Calvin felt the concrete scrape his knees as Maddox kicked his legs apart. The officer's knee pressed into his back, grinding him into the pavement. His perfectly pressed brown overcoat, chosen so carefully to project respectability, was now stained with dirt and engine grease. "This is completely unnecessary," Calvin managed to say, fighting to keep his voice level despite the knee crushing his spine. "I live here. I'm just trying to—" "Still running your mouth?" Klein grabbed Calvin's arms, yanking them behind his back with excessive force. The handcuffs clicked shut several notches too tight, metal biting into Calvin's wrists. "Maybe a ride downtown will teach you some respect." The folder Calvin had been carrying lay forgotten on the ground, its contents scattered across the sidewalk. Grant proposals and budget sheets fluttered in the morning breeze, some sliding into puddles, others catching in nearby bushes. Months of work reduced to litter, while neighbors watched from behind their windows. More patrol cars arrived, lights flashing, creating a carnival atmosphere. Each new siren drew more attention, more witnesses to Calvin's humiliation. He could feel the weight of their stares as he lay face down on the pavement. Linda Sutter had edged closer, phone raised now to record the scene. "Officers," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I just want to thank you for protecting our neighborhood. When I saw him walking around, I knew something wasn't right. You can never be too careful these days." Calvin closed his eyes briefly, understanding washing over him like ice water. This wasn't about law enforcement. This wasn't about safety. This was about putting him in his place, about making a spectacle of his dignity. Every shout, every rough handle, every tight clink of the cuffs. It was all choreographed to send a message to him and everyone watching. Klein and Maddox hauled Calvin to his feet, gripping his arms with unnecessary force. His tie, the blue one he'd chosen this morning thinking it looked professional, hung askew, brushing against the patrol car's dirty fender. The officers made no move to help him regain his balance as they marched him toward the back seat. "Watch your head," Klein said with mock politeness, then shoved Calvin down hard enough that his forehead bounced off the doorframe. Pain exploded behind his eyes as they forced him into the back seat. The patrol car's interior smelled of stale sweat and despair. Through the window, Calvin watched his quiet suburban street transform into a circus of flashing lights and gawking faces. Linda Sutter stood in the center of it all, one hand pressed to her heart, while the other held her phone steady, capturing every moment of his degradation. The door slammed shut with a heavy finality. In the rearview mirror, Klein's eyes met Calvin's, the officer's lips curling into a smirk of satisfaction. The same expression Calvin had seen countless times before, the look of a man who knew the system would protect him, no matter what he did. As the patrol car pulled away, Calvin watched his street shrink behind the scratched plexiglass divider. His wrists throbbed where the cuffs bit into them. His shoulder ached from being twisted. But worse than the physical pain was the knowledge that this display of force had achieved exactly what they'd wanted: to humiliate him publicly, to remind him and everyone watching that his dignity could be stripped away in an instant. From behind the scratched plexiglass window at booking, Officer Klein's pen scratched across paperwork with deliberate strokes. "Subject exhibited aggressive resistance," he muttered as he wrote, each word falling like a hammer. "Refused verbal commands, physically combative." Officer Maddox stood at his shoulder, adding his own embellishments. Demonstrated hostile behavior throughout the encounter. Required significant force to subdue. Calvin watched them construct their narrative, his wrists still raw from the too tight handcuffs. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the intake area's grimy white walls. Other officers moved around them, casting sideways glances at Calvin before quickly looking away. "I need to speak with a supervisor," Calvin said, keeping his voice steady despite the anger and fear churning in his stomach. "This report is false. I never resisted." "Shut up," Klein snapped without looking up. "You'll get your chance to talk to someone when we're good and ready." "You mean when you've finished writing your fiction?" The words slipped out before Calvin could stop them, born of hours of humiliation and mounting frustration. Klein's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. "You want to add threatening an officer to that list? Keep running your mouth." A desk sergeant wandered over, coffee cup in hand. "Problems?" "Nah," Maddox said smoothly. "Just another tough guy who doesn't know when to be quiet." They led Calvin down a narrow hallway to a small holding room with a metal table bolted to the floor. The chair scraped against concrete as Klein pulled it out. "Sit," he ordered. "Maybe some time in here will help you remember how this really went down. Admit you got aggressive, and maybe we can work something out." Calvin lowered himself into the chair, spine straight, face composed despite the tremor of rage he felt. "I won't admit to something that didn't happen." "Have it your way," Maddox said with a shrug. "Hope you don't have anywhere important to be tonight." The door closed with a heavy click, leaving Calvin alone with the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of voices. His thoughts drifted to the scattered papers on the sidewalk. Grant proposals that had taken months to prepare, now probably ruined. His carefully planned day destroyed because someone decided his presence in his own neighborhood was threatening. Time stretched like taffy in that small room. 1 hour bled into 2, then 3. No water, no bathroom break, just the constant awareness that this was another form of control. Making him wait, making him wonder, wearing him down. The door opened suddenly, and a young officer stuck his head in. "Brooks, you've got a visitor." Calvin was led back to the front desk area. Joan Pritchard stood there, her silver hair neat as always, her spine straight as a ruler. Despite her age, she radiated an energy that made the officers behind the desk shift uncomfortably. "I've brought some items that need to be entered into evidence," Joan announced, her librarian's voice cutting through the station noise. She placed a thick folder on the counter. "A complete timeline of today's events, including timestamps from my doorbell camera, which captured the entire incident from multiple angles." The desk sergeant started to speak, but Joan continued as if he hadn't moved. "I've also included detailed notes of what I witnessed, particularly the officer's escalation of force against an obviously compliant citizen." She adjusted her glasses. "I've already backed up multiple copies of the video footage, of course, standard archival practice." The atmosphere in the room shifted subtly. The desk sergeant picked up the folder with more care than he'd shown anything else that day. "We'll look into this," he said slowly. "Yes, you will," Joan agreed pleasantly. Her eyes met Calvin's. "Are you all right?" Calvin nodded, touched by her presence and preparation. "Trust a librarian to document everything." "He gets his phone call now," Joan informed the sergeant. It wasn't a question. Minutes later, Calvin stood at a wall-mounted phone, his fingers hovering over the keypad. The card was years old, carried more out of habit than hope. A White House liaison's contact information given to him after a community service recognition event. Ethan Ward had seemed genuinely impressed by Calvin's volunteer work, had told him to call if he ever needed anything. Calvin had never imagined needing it like this. The station had grown quieter as night fell. He could feel eyes on him, Klein and Maddox hovering near the desk, Joan's steady presence by the door, the curious glances of other officers. His hands wanted to shake. He wouldn't let them. Carefully, deliberately, he dialed the number. Each digit felt like a step into unknown territory. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times as Calvin's heart hammered against his ribs. This could be his only chance to get ahead of the false narrative being built against him. On the fourth ring, just as doubt began to creep in, the line clicked. "This is Ethan Ward's office," a crisp voice answered. Calvin took a deep breath, squared his shoulders, and prepared to make the most important call of his life. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Papers rustled at the desk where Klein and Maddox had stopped pretending to work, openly watching him now. Joan stood like a sentinel by the door, her presence a reminder that someone had seen the truth, had documented it, had refused to look away. The receiver felt heavy in Calvin's hand as he prepared to speak, knowing these next words could determine whether justice would be buried under paperwork or forced into the light. From the phone's receiver, Calvin heard rustling papers and typing. He kept his voice low but clear. "Mr. Ward, this is Calvin Brooks. We met 3 years ago at the Community Leadership Recognition event. I need to report a civil rights violation." "Mr. Brooks? Yes, I remember your work with the Youth Mentorship Program." Ethan's casual tone shifted to something more measured. "Please proceed with just the facts." Calvin gripped the phone tighter, conscious of the eyes on him. "Today, at approximately 2 p.m., I was walking to an appointment in my neighborhood. 2 officers, Brent Klein and Ross Maddox, approached me with weapons drawn. I complied with all commands, but they claimed I was resisting. They arrested me at gunpoint. There's video evidence, but I'm concerned it might disappear." The typing on the other end stopped. "Are you currently in custody?" "Yes, at the central station. They're still processing the paperwork." "Are you injured?" "No serious injuries. Some bruising from the handcuffs." "One moment." The line went quiet except for rapid clicking. "Mr. Brooks, I'm connecting you to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division intake line. They'll record your statement. After that, I strongly advise you to obtain counsel immediately and document everything. Times, names, badge numbers, witnesses. Can you do that?" "Yes," Calvin said, his chest tight with relief that someone was listening. "My neighbor already has video footage backed up." "Good. Hold for transfer." A new voice came on the line. Crisp, professional, female. "This is Special Agent Monica Torres. I'm recording this call. Please state your name and location." Calvin repeated his account, adding every detail he could remember. Behind him, he heard footsteps quickening, voices dropping to whispers. A sergeant hurried past, phone pressed to his ear. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks," Agent Torres said when he finished. "We're initiating preliminary inquiries. Do not discuss this call with the officers. If they ask, simply say you contacted your attorney." The call ended, but its effects rippled through the station immediately. The desk area had become a hive of nervous energy. Officers clustered in corners, speaking in low tones. Phones rang at multiple desks. Calvin caught fragments of conversations as he was led back to the holding bench. "Chief Vance needs to be notified. Federal inquiry already. Body cam footage secured. Could be serious." Officer Klein strode past, his earlier swagger replaced by rigid posture and tight lips. He wouldn't meet Calvin's eyes. Officer Maddox was nowhere to be seen. In the lobby, Joan Pritchard sat ramrod straight in a plastic chair, her phone in her hands. Her fingers moved steadily across the screen, methodically creating digital breadcrumbs that couldn't be erased. She'd positioned herself with a clear view of both exits and the booking desk, recording every movement like the keeper of records she'd been for 40 years. The station's atmosphere had transformed. The casual indifference was gone, replaced by an undercurrent of tension. Officers who had ignored Calvin earlier now cast wary glances his way. A young desk clerk whispered into her phone, "Yes, sir. Chief Vance is being briefed now." More senior officers appeared, their brass gleaming under fluorescent lights. They huddled near the watch commander's office, gesturing at papers and phones. Calvin recognized the shift in power. He was no longer just another arrest to be processed and forgotten. He'd become a problem they hadn't anticipated. The minutes ticked by. Joan's presence anchored him as she continued her quiet documentation. She'd occasionally catch his eye and give a slight nod, reassuring him that every detail was being preserved. Her phone would buzz, and she'd tap out another message, building redundancy into their truth. Around 11:45 p.m., the station door opened. A woman in a crisp blazer entered, her badge hanging from a chain around her neck. The chatter in the station died immediately. She moved with the confidence of someone used to asking uncomfortable questions and expecting honest answers. "Lieutenant Sandra Pike, Internal Affairs," she announced to the watch commander. Her voice carried across the now quiet room. "Where are Officers Klein and Maddox?" "Break room," someone muttered. "Get them." Pike's tone left no room for delay. She turned to the desk sergeant. "I need their body cameras. All footage from today's shift. Now." The sergeant shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, there's a process for—" "That process changed about 20 minutes ago, when this became a federal inquiry." Pike cut him off. "Cameras. Now. And if anyone's accessed that footage in the last 6 hours, I want to know who and why." Calvin watched as the station's carefully constructed narrative began to crack. Officers who had been so certain of their authority now moved with the jerky energy of people realizing their actions would face scrutiny. Klein and Maddox emerged from the break room, their faces pale under the harsh lighting. Joan caught Calvin's eye again and held up her phone briefly. She'd been right. The truth needed witnesses, and witnesses needed backup plans. While the system had expected Calvin to disappear into its machinery, he'd instead connected to people who could shine light into its darkest corners. The station clock crept toward midnight. Lieutenant Pike stood at the booking desk, her presence like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples of consequence in every direction. Her voice cut through the tense silence. "Where are the body cams?" The station's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows as Lieutenant Pike stood at the desk, her presence drawing every eye. Chief Mallory Vance burst through the door, his usual polish slightly askew, tie crooked, suit jacket wrinkled from a rushed drive. "Lieutenant Pike," he said, forcing a diplomatic smile. "This late-night visit is unexpected." "Chief Vance?" Pike's voice remained steady. "I need immediate access to all footage and documentation related to today's arrest of Calvin Brooks. Body cameras, dispatch recordings, booking video, everything." Vance's smile tightened. "There are procedures for requesting—" "This is no longer a request." Pike held up her phone. "I have direct authorization from the DOJ Civil Rights Division. They're expecting preliminary evidence within the hour." The color drained from Vance's face. Behind him, Officer Klein shifted nervously, while Officer Maddox stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. "Officers Klein and Maddox," Pike called out. "Turn in your badges and weapons. You're on administrative leave pending investigation." "This is ridiculous," Klein protested. "We were responding to a legitimate call. Now!" Pike's tone could have frozen water. "Or shall we discuss this resistance to a lawful order?" The irony wasn't lost on Calvin, who watched from his bench as Klein's hands shook while surrendering his badge. Maddox moved mechanically, his face masked in practiced blankness. "Chief," Pike continued, "I want access to your evidence storage room. And I need your tech personnel to verify no one has tampered with any recordings." Vance's polished facade cracked further. "Lieutenant, surely we can handle this internally?" That time passed when federal authorities became involved. Pike gestured to 2 officers who had arrived with her. "Secure the evidence room. No one enters without my authorization." Joan Pritchard remained in the lobby, her phone continuously active. She'd been sending updates to a secure email account all night, creating a timestamp trail that couldn't be erased. Calvin noticed how the officers gave her a wide berth, as if her documentation was radioactive. Through the station windows, Calvin spotted a news van pulling up. Maya Whitfield, known for her uncompromising investigative reporting, stepped out with a cameraman. The night shift sergeant cursed under his breath. "Chief," Pike said, "I suggest you prepare a statement." Ms. Whitfield appears eager for comments. Vance retreated to his office, already dialing numbers. The station buzzed with urgent whispers and hurried movements. Evidence technicians appeared with laptops and external drives, their faces grim as Pike supervised the data transfer. Around 4 a.m., D.A. Tripp Sloan arrived, his expensive suit a stark contrast to his thunderous expression. He huddled with Vance, their heated whispers carrying fragments. "Can't let this spiral. Federal involvement already. Maintain some control." Sloan approached Calvin, his smile as genuine as plastic flowers. "Mr. Brooks, you're free to go. However," he paused meaningfully, "the resisting charge will be processed. Court date within 30 days. Calvin stood, dignity intact despite his exhaustion. "You're charging me for resisting when the evidence shows I complied?" "Evidence can be interpreted many ways," Sloan replied smoothly. "Perhaps you'll reconsider your approach to this situation before then." The threat was clear. Back down or face the machine's full weight. Calvin straightened his tie, wrinkled but still proper. "I look forward to presenting the truth in court." Dawn was breaking as Calvin walked out, Joan beside him like a sentinel. Maya Whitfield approached, camera light harsh in the growing morning. "Mr. Brooks," she called out, "can you tell us what happened today?" Calvin paused, aware of eyes watching from the station windows. "I was arrested at gunpoint for walking down my street. Officers claimed I was resisting while I complied with every order. The truth is, on video. My doorbell camera caught everything," Joan added firmly. "Multiple copies exist in secure locations." Maya's eyes sparkled with professional interest. "And is it true federal authorities are involved?" "No comment on ongoing investigations," Calvin replied, remembering Agent Torres's advice. The sky painted itself pink and gold as Calvin finally approached his front porch. Joan had insisted on following him home, her presence both comfort and witness. His hands were steady as he reached for his front door, but his heart stumbled when he saw the paper tucked into the frame. The note, typed in stark black letters, read, "We know where you live." Joan plucked it from the door before Calvin could touch it. "Evidence bag in my car," she said calmly. "They're not as smart as they think they are. Printer paper has batch numbers." "Maya?" The reporter was already approaching with her camera, documenting the threat. Calvin stood straighter, adjusting his tie one more time. The brown overcoat that had started this day still hung neat despite everything. He was tired but unbroken, his dignity a weapon they couldn't take. Inside the station lay Totters. Pike's voice cut through the morning shift change. "These body cameras better be exactly as they were. If I find 1 second of footage altered, careers will end today." The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across Calvin's lawn. The suburban quiet felt different now, less peaceful, more watching. But Calvin had stopped a machine that expected him to disappear, and though it was wounded and angry, he wouldn't back down. Not anymore. Joan sealed the threat note in a clear evidence bag, her movements precise. Maya's camera captured it all, ensuring the truth would have many eyes. Calvin's phone buzzed. Another message from Agent Torres. "Evidence preservation team arriving within the hour. Stay safe." Morning sunlight streamed through Calvin's kitchen window, but brought no warmth. His hands trembled as he lifted his coffee cup, the brown liquid rippling like his unsettled nerves. The morning news played quietly on his small counter radio, the local station already spinning their version of yesterday's events. "Just a routine stop," the police spokesman claimed. Officers following standard procedure. Calvin picked up his phone, dreading the call he had to make. After 3 rings, Sharon from HR answered with professional detachment. "Mr. Brooks," she said, her voice cool. "We've been expecting your call." "Sharon, I need to explain what happened." "The company has already been made aware of the situation," she cut in. "Given the circumstances and pending charges, you're being placed on administrative leave effective immediately, without pay, pending investigation." Calvin's throat tightened. "But I haven't been convicted of anything. I was wrongfully—" "This is standard procedure, Mr. Brooks. We'll need you to return any company property within 48 hours. Your building access has been temporarily suspended." The line went dead before he could respond. 15 years of spotless service wiped away with one phone call. His mortgage payment loomed 2 weeks away. A gentle knock interrupted his spiraling thoughts. Joan Pritchard stood at his back door, arms full of grocery bags, her silver hair neat despite the early hour. "You need to eat," she announced, bustling in without waiting for an invitation. "And we need to plan." She unpacked methodically. Bread, eggs, fruit, coffee, enough for several days. From her ever-present tote bag, she pulled a crisp folder. "I've started our documentation," she said, spreading papers across his table. "Witness names, timestamps, security camera locations. We need redundancy. Copies in multiple places they can't reach." Calvin stared at the growing pile of papers. "They already reached my job." "Expected," Joan nodded grimly. "They'll try to isolate you first. Cut off resources, support systems, make you feel alone." She squeezed his shoulder. "But you're not." His doorbell rang. Deacon Harold Hal Mercer stood on the front porch, his weathered face creased with concern. Calvin let him in, noticing how Hal's eyes swept the street before entering. "Church council met early this morning," Hal said, settling into a kitchen chair. "We're with you, Calvin. But I need to be straight. This won't be easy. Some folks are already calling you a troublemaker." "Let me guess," Joan said sharply. "Linda Sutter's been talking?" Hal nodded. "Her Facebook post has hundreds of shares. 'I was just trying to protect our neighborhood,' she wrote. 'He looked suspicious, moving fast, watching houses.'" Calvin's coffee turned bitter in his mouth. "I was walking to my car, in a tie." "Doesn't matter to them," Hal sighed. "They'll paint whatever picture serves their purpose." Joan's phone buzzed. She read the message and straightened. "Renee Alvarez can meet us at 2. She's taking the case." "The civil rights attorney?" Hal's eyebrows rose. "That's good. You'll need her experience." Calvin checked his own phone. Dozens of missed calls, messages from concerned friends, and one text from an unknown number. Should have just cooperated. The morning crawled by. Calvin watched more patrol cars than usual cruise his street. Neighbors walked their dogs on the opposite sidewalk, some avoiding eye contact, others staring too long. Around noon, a local news van parked briefly before Joan marched out and firmly suggested they respect private property. At 2 o'clock sharp, Renee Alvarez arrived, her smart pantsuit and briefcase radiating competence. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "They'll use procedure as punishment," she said, arranging files on Calvin's table. "Court dates that conflict with work. Check-ins designed to disrupt your schedule. Paperwork that's always somehow incomplete. But the evidence," Calvin started. "Can vanish," Renee cut in. "Files corrupt. Footage gets misplaced. Witnesses suddenly can't remember clearly." She fixed Calvin with a steady gaze. "This isn't just about 2 officers anymore. The whole department will protect their narrative." Joan produced her own files. "I've already backed up everything. Multiple formats, multiple locations." Renee nodded approvingly. "Good. D.A. Sloan is ambitious. He'll try to make an example of Calvin. Paint him as aggressive, uncooperative. The kind of case that plays well with certain voters." "But the White House liaison," Calvin began. Bought us time and attention, Renee agreed. But local courts move on local time. Sloan knows that. He'll drag this out, wear you down, make you want to plead just to end it. She opened her laptop, fingers moving swiftly. We need to get ahead of this. Jones' footage shows your compliance. We have timestamps proving the 911 call was suspicious. There's a pattern here. We just need to force them to face it. Calvin's kitchen had become a war room. Joan organized evidence chronologically, while Hal made calls to church members who'd witnessed the arrest. Renee drafted motions, her typing punctuated by sharp observations about procedural violations. Tomorrow's arraignment is crucial, Renee explained. They'll try to set harsh conditions, restricted movement, frequent check-ins, maybe even ankle monitoring, all designed to break your routine, your dignity. She looked up from her screen. I've seen this playbook before. They're betting you'll crack under pressure. Accept a plea just to get your life back. Calvin straightened his tie, the same blue one from yesterday, now a symbol of defiance. They bet wrong. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across his kitchen floor. Outside, another patrol car rolled by, slower than necessary. Joan documented its plate number without comment. Hal prayed quietly in the corner, his presence a steady anchor. Renee closed one file, opened another. 7 o'clock, she said. Let's review our strategy for tomorrow. The court appearance is just the first battle. They're counting on you fighting alone. The courthouse hallway's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Calvin's face as he straightened his blue tie. The same tie from the arrest, now a quiet statement of defiance. Renee Alvarez stood beside him, briefcase ready, her posture broadcasting calm authority. Remember, she murmured, they want a reaction. Don't give them one. The wooden benches lining the hall filled with mourning defendants, but a clear space remained around Calvin, as if proximity might be contagious. Joan Pritchard arrived, notebook and pen already in hand, settling onto a bench with librarian precision. D.A. Trip Sloan strode past, expensive suit cutting through the crowd. He barely glanced at Calvin, but his dismissive smirk said everything. 2 uniformed officers flanked the courtroom doors, hands resting too casually on their weapons. Intimidation theater, Renee whispered. Standard playbook. Inside, the courtroom's polished surfaces gleamed under more fluorescent lights. The American flag hung limp in the corner, its promise of justice feeling distant. Calvin took his place beside Renee, conscious of every eye watching, waiting for him to prove their prejudices right. Docket number 47329, the clerk announced. State versus Calvin Brooks. Charge of resisting arrest. D.A. Sloan rose, straightening his tie with manicured fingers. Your Honor, the defendant displayed aggressive behavior during a routine stop. Officers were forced to respond to his confrontational stance. Objection, Renee cut in smoothly. Counsel is editorializing without evidence. The judge, a thin man named Harrison with wire-rimmed glasses, nodded slightly. Noted. Continue, Mr. Sloan. Sloan produced a document with theatrical timing. We have a statement from Chief Vance's office praising Officers Klein and Maddox for their professional handling of a volatile situation. Calvin's hands tightened beneath the table, but his face remained neutral. The volatile situation had been him walking to his car. Furthermore, Sloan continued, given the defendant's hostile attitude— Objection, Renee interrupted again. Characterization without foundation. Sustained, Judge Harrison sighed. Mr. Sloan, stick to facts. But the damage was done. The word hostile hung in the air like smoke. Calvin noticed the court reporter's fingers hesitate over her keys, as if even she felt the weight of the narrative being constructed. The state requests strict release conditions, Sloan pressed. Daily check-ins at the police station. Travel restricted to work and home. No contact with witnesses. Renee stood. Your Honor, my client has no prior record. He's a respected professional with deep community ties. These conditions are punitive and unnecessary. Judge Harrison peered over his glasses. Mr. Brooks, do you understand that any violation of release conditions will result in immediate detention? Yes, Your Honor. Calvin kept his voice steady, measured, giving them nothing to twist. Very well. The judge shuffled papers. Release conditions set as follows. Check-ins 3 times per week at the police station. Travel restricted to work, home, and essential services within city limits. No contact with Officers Klein or Maddox or any potential witnesses. Behind Calvin, Joan's pen scratched steadily, documenting every word. The conditions were designed to strangle his routine. Check-ins that would disrupt work. Travel limits that would complicate basic errands. Additionally, the judge continued, defendant must surrender his passport and maintain current employment. Calvin felt the cruel irony. They'd already forced his job to suspend him. Renee's hand touched his arm briefly, a silent signal to stay calm. Outside the courtroom, reporters clustered like hungry birds. Maya Whitfield stepped forward, her press badge catching the light. Unlike the others, her microphone didn't thrust aggressively. Mr. Brooks, she asked quietly, did you resist? The hallway hushed. Other reporters leaned in, cameras whirring. Calvin met Maya's gaze directly. I survived, he answered, his dignity intact. The whispers started immediately. Court staff watched from doorways. A passing bailiff's hand drifted to his weapon. The message was clear. How dare he survive without apology? Linda Sutter stood near the elevator, clutching her purse like a shield. Her eyes met Calvin's briefly, before skittering away. But not before he caught the satisfaction in them. She'd lit the fuse with her call, and now she was watching the explosion from a safe distance. Your next check-in is tomorrow at 8 a.m., the court clerk announced, handing Calvin papers. Any missed check-in will trigger a warrant. 8 a.m., when most people would be starting their workday. Calvin accepted the papers without comment, feeling the system's gears grinding into motion. Joan approached, her notebook full of fresh observations. I counted 4 separate cases this morning. All similar patterns, harsh conditions, morning check-ins, travel restrictions. They've done this before. Renee nodded grimly. It's how they maintain control. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. The courthouse steps seemed steeper on the way down. More patrol cars than usual circled the block. Calvin spotted Officer Maddox watching from a parked cruiser across the street. Not obviously, but deliberately visible. His phone buzzed, another message from an unknown number. Should have kept your mouth shut. Don't engage, Renee advised, noting the message's timestamp. That's what they want. The morning sun felt cold despite the clear sky. Downtown traffic flowed normally around the courthouse, the world continuing as if nothing had changed. But Calvin felt the invisible bars being constructed. Check-ins, restrictions, surveillance. The kind of cage built from paperwork instead of steel. Maya Whitfield caught up to them at the parking lot. Mr. Brooks, I'd like to do a proper interview. Tell your side accurately. We'll consider it, Renee replied, before Calvin could speak. Right now, we're focusing on documentation. Joan held up her notebook. Everything's logged. Times, badges, statements. They can't erase what we've preserved. The community center's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as people filed in, filling rows of metal folding chairs. The air conditioning struggled against the crowd's collective tension. Calvin sat between Renee and Joan, with Deacon Hal Mercer's steady presence behind them. The room smelled of coffee and barely contained hostility. Chief Mallory Vance approached the podium, his badge catching the light. His crisp uniform and practiced smile projected authority without force, a masterclass in controlled messaging. "Good evening, neighbors," he began, voice smooth as polished marble. "We're here to discuss recent events that have caused concern in our community." Linda Sutter sat prominently in the front row, tissues clutched in manicured hands. Her performance of distress drew sympathetic murmurs from nearby supporters. "Public safety requires trust," Vance continued. "When officers encounter resistance..." A cluster of uniformed officers near the wall nodded approvingly. Officer Klein wasn't present, but his supporters made their presence known, with pointed applause at the word resistance. Joan's pen moved steadily across her notebook, documenting every calculated word and choreographed reaction. Beside her, Renee typed quick notes on her phone, building their record of the narrative being constructed. "Mrs. Sutter," Vance gestured respectfully, "would you like to share your experience?" Linda stood, dabbing at dry eyes. "I was so frightened," she quavered. "When I saw him walking through our neighborhood, looking at houses." "I was walking to my car," Calvin said quietly. But the moderator, a thin man named Peterson, raised his hand for silence. Linda continued, her voice growing stronger with her audience's support. "I did what we're always told. If you see something, say something." The officers were so professional, even when he became difficult. More approving murmurs, more pointed looks at Calvin. "Thank you for your courage," Vance said gravely. "This is exactly why we need community vigilance." Deacon Hal's hand settled briefly on Calvin's shoulder. Steady, grounding. The tension in Calvin's jaw eased slightly, but his eyes remained sharp, missing nothing. When the moderator opened the floor for comments, Calvin stood. Peterson's hand shot up immediately. "Perhaps," Peterson suggested with manufactured concern, "Mr. Brooks would prefer to have a private conversation with Chief Vance later. These emotions are still fresh. Silencing truth doesn't serve justice." Renee's voice cut through the murmurs. She stood beside Calvin, professional and precise. "If the facts support your narrative, they can survive public discussion." Maya Whitfield's camera tracked the exchange, catching Peterson's discomfort and Vance's carefully neutral expression. Now, Peterson placated. "We're trying to heal as a community. By excluding half of it?" Joan's question carried the weight of decades watching similar tactics. The crowd's mood shifted like weather before a storm. Someone in the back, deliberately just hidden enough, shouted a racial slur that echoed off the walls. Calvin didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply took out his phone and began recording, his movements deliberate and calm. The documentation itself became an act of defiance. "Name, badge number, and timestamp," he stated clearly, panning across the uniformed officers who failed to react to the slur. "Noted." Vance's polished facade cracked slightly. This wasn't following the script. The target wasn't playing his assigned role of either aggressor or apologist. More voices rose from the crowd. "Why are you making trouble? Just apologize. Go back to..." "Point of order," Deacon Hal interrupted, his deep voice commanding attention. "The bylaws require speakers be recognized and identified. So let's have names with those comments." The shouters fell silent, unwilling to own their words. Linda Sutter stood again, clutching the back of her chair. "I just don't understand why he's making this so difficult. The officers were doing their jobs." "Their jobs?" Renee's eyebrow arched. "Is it department policy to draw weapons on unarmed citizens walking to their cars? To manufacture resistance charges without cause? Please, cite the relevant regulations." Peterson fumbled with his papers. "We're not here to debate police procedure." "Exactly," Calvin said quietly. "You're here to pressure me into accepting injustice quietly." He turned to face the crowd directly. "I will not apologize for walking while black in my own neighborhood. I will not apologize for surviving an armed confrontation I didn't create. and I will not apologize for demanding accountability." He walked toward the exit, steps measured and dignified. Joan, Renee, and Deacon Hal moved with him, not as an escape, but as a choice to reject the farce. Maya's camera followed their exit, capturing the stark contrast between Calvin's composure and the angry faces behind him. She caught Vance checking his phone with sudden concern. Clearly, higher authorities were taking notice. The parking lot was dark except for scattered security lights. Calvin's car sat alone near the back, and even from a distance, the spiderweb crack across his windshield was visible. The message was as crude as it was clear. His phone buzzed with a voicemail from an unlisted number. The voice hissed with artificial courage, "We'll make you the example." Renee immediately documented the threat, while Joan photographed the windshield damage. Deacon Hal surveyed the empty lot with practiced awareness, noting surveillance camera angles. "They're escalating," Renee observed, "because dignity scares them more than anger." Calvin touched the cracked glass, his reflection fragmented but unbroken. "They want me to choose between dignity and safety. I choose both." Morning sunlight streamed through the blinds in Renee's office, casting stripes across stacks of papers, and photographs spread across the conference table. The evidence told their story in precise detail. Time-stamped images, written statements, and multiple angles of footage showing the truth they needed to protect. Joan Pritchard sat straight-backed in her chair, methodically walking them through her system. Her silver hair caught the light as she gestured to each carefully labeled folder. "I've been a librarian for 40 years, she explained, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd spent decades preserving knowledge. "The first thing you learn is that information isn't safe unless it's redundant." She opened her laptop, revealing a detailed spreadsheet. Every piece of evidence exists in 5 places. 3 digital, 2 physical, all with documented chains of custody. Her mouse clicked through folders. External drives, cloud storage, printed copies in 2 locations, and everything has timestamps that can be verified. Renee leaned forward, studying the doorbell camera footage Joan had preserved. The video quality was crystal clear. Calvin's hands raised, palms open, his posture non-threatening. Officer Klein's aggressive stance filled the frame, his weapon drawn despite no visible threat. "The audio is what sells it," Joan said, turning up the volume. Calvin's calm voice came through clearly. "I'm complying, sir," followed immediately by Klein's manufactured drama. "Stop resisting!" "This is exactly what we need," Renee said, already pulling up motion templates on her computer. The contrast between reality and their narrative couldn't be clearer. She picked up her phone, dialing Lieutenant Sandra Pike's direct line. "Lieutenant, Renee Alvarez, I'm about to file motions with some compelling evidence. I need confirmation that you've secured the department's footage as well." Joan continued organizing while Renee spoke, her movements precise and purposeful. She'd created detailed logs of every witness statement, every threatening note, every instance of intimidation they documented. "Look at this pattern," she said, spreading out a timeline. "The escalation isn't random. Every time we present evidence, they respond with pressure. That's consciousness of guilt." Maya Whitfield arrived just before noon, cameraman in tow. She reviewed the footage carefully, asking pointed questions about verification and sources. Her professionalism showed in every detail she confirmed. "This isn't about sensation," Maya said, making notes. "This is about showing people exactly what happened, without commentary. The facts speak for themselves." Her segment aired that afternoon. The station ran it straight. No dramatic music, no emotional manipulation, just clear footage of a man being targeted, complete with timestamp verification and expert analysis of proper police procedure versus what actually occurred. The impact was immediate. Phones started ringing. Emails poured in. Older residents especially recognized the tactics they were seeing, the kind of institutional pressure they'd watched silence truth before. "My mother called," Maya reported later. "She's lived here 40 years. She said she always suspected things like this happened, but now she has proof. She's angry, and she's not alone." Deacon Hal arrived mid-afternoon, his calm presence filling the room. "We're gathering tonight," he said. Not to protest, not to shout, just to stand together and show Calvin he's not alone. He pulled out his own notebook. "I've got 20 senior church members who've documented similar incidents over the years. They're ready to speak up now that someone's broken the silence." Calvin sat quietly through most of the day, watching truth take solid form in files and footage. The weight that had pressed on his shoulders since the arrest seemed to lift slightly with each new layer of verification. "This is really happening," he said softly. "They can't just make it disappear." "No, they can't," Renee agreed, printing another copy of the motion. "Tomorrow's hearing could end this charge. The evidence is too clear, too well documented." Joan patted his hand. "That's why I started recording the moment I saw them approach you. Because truth needs teeth to bite through lies." The community gathering that evening was exactly as Deacon Hal had planned. Dignified, determined, and impossible to dismiss as angry rabble. Gray-haired grandmothers stood beside young professionals. Children held small signs saying simply, "Truth matters." They didn't march. They didn't chant. They simply stood together in the church parking lot. A quiet testament to solidarity that made the evening news alongside Maya's footage. "This is what they fear most," Renee observed, watching the coverage. Not violence, not shouting. Just calm, documented truth, backed by community witness. Back in her office, the day's victory felt tangible as she prepared to secure the evidence for the night. The footage that would end this case sat ready for tomorrow's hearing. She copied it to the secure drive, watching the progress bar move steadily across her screen. At 98%, everything froze. The screen flickered once and went completely black. Joan's redundancy system would prove prophetic sooner than anyone expected. The simple progress bar became a stark reminder. Truth might have teeth, but corruption had claws that reached into digital darkness. Renee's fingers flew across the keyboard, but nothing responded. The black screen mocked her efforts, hiding whatever damage had been done behind its dark wall. Calvin stood behind her chair, his reflection ghostly in the dead monitor. "No, no, no," Renee muttered, forcing herself to slow down and think systematically. She reached for her phone, already dialing IT support. "This isn't a crash. This is targeted." Joan pulled out her own laptop, checking their backup locations. Her face tightened. "The shared drive is showing access errors. Someone's been inside the system." Renee switched to her backup computer, logging into their secure server. Red flags popped up everywhere. Altered timestamps, missing files, corrupted data. The neat package they'd prepared for court had been gutted with surgical precision. They knew exactly what to hit, Renee said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "This wasn't random. They went straight for the authenticated copies we needed for tomorrow's hearing." Calvin sank into a chair, his shoulders heavy. "How? The system was supposed to be secure." "Systems are only as secure as the people who control them," Joan replied, still typing. Her screen showed multiple folders, each labeled with her precise organizational system. "But they don't know librarians. We believe in redundancy." She opened her email, revealing dozens of messages sent to herself, each containing pieces of evidence with verified timestamps. "Every time I updated our files, I sent encrypted copies through different channels. They can't erase what they can't find." Renee was already documenting the attack, taking screenshots of access logs and error messages. "This proves consciousness of guilt. They're destroying evidence. That's a separate crime. A sharp knock at the office door made them all jump. Maya Whitfield stood in the doorway, her face grim. "You need to see this," she said, holding up her phone. "They're making their move." The phone showed a police report filed minutes ago, claiming Calvin had violated his release conditions by threatening a witness. The details were vague, but official-looking, wrapped in just enough procedural language to seem legitimate. "This is impossible," Calvin said, reading the report. "I haven't left my house except for approved meetings. I haven't spoken to anyone they haven't cleared." "Truth doesn't matter," Renee said, already reaching for her coat. "They just needed a paper trail. We need to get you—" Red and blue lights flashed through the office windows, cutting her off. Multiple patrol cars pulled up outside, their arrival choreographed for maximum impact. Through the glass, they could see Officer Maddox standing back, watching from his personal vehicle, stripped of his badge, but still pulling strings. "Remember," Renee said quickly, gripping Calvin's arm. "Say nothing. Not one word. I'll be right behind you." The officers entered with practiced efficiency, hands on weapons, though they knew Calvin posed no threat. They recited the violation claims in bored voices, as if this was just routine paperwork instead of calculated destruction. Calvin stood perfectly still as they cuffed him, his face a mask of dignity that made their show of force look excessive. Joan filmed everything openly, her phone steady despite her anger. Maya's cameraman arrived just in time to catch Calvin being led out. Exactly the image the department wanted to spread. At the station, DA Tripp Sloan was waiting, his suit crisp despite the late hour. "Mr. Brooks seems unable to follow simple instructions," he announced to the assembled press. "This pattern of unstable, non-compliant behavior proves our original concerns were justified." They placed Calvin in the same cell as before, the familiar humiliation settling over him like a weighted blanket. Hours passed in fluorescent-lit silence. Around him, the machine hummed, papers shuffled, phones rang, justice delayed with every minute. Finally, alone in his cell, Calvin's composure cracked. His hands shook as he pressed them against his face, muffling a sound that was part sob, part fury. Every rule he'd followed, every system he'd trusted, had been turned against him. But in that moment of breaking, something else crystallized. A steel-hard resolve that dried his tears and straightened his spine. They wanted him to disappear into their system, to become another statistic of submission. Instead, he would become their nightmare, a witness who refused to be silenced. The first gray light of dawn was seeping through the high window when Renee appeared at his cell. Her voice was barely a whisper through the glass, but her words carried the weight of a hammer. "We go federal. Today." Calvin nodded, understanding exactly what that meant. No more playing nice with local power. No more trusting corrupt systems to police themselves. They would push this up to where badges couldn't reach and connections couldn't save. Behind Renee, Joan stood with her ever-present notebook, already documenting this latest abuse of power. She'd stayed all night, organizing evidence of the cyber attack alongside proof of this retaliatory arrest. Maya waited in the lobby, her camera ready to show the world what happened to people who dared to demand accountability. The morning sun climbed higher, casting bars of light across Calvin's cell floor. Each stripe looked like a ladder rung, leading up and out of the local machine's reach. They thought this cell would break him. Instead, it had become the launching pad for something much bigger than a simple resisting arrest charge. They wanted him to resist. Now he would resist their way, with evidence, with witnesses, with federal oversight that couldn't be deleted or detained. The time for quiet dignity was over. This was war fought with paperwork and truth. and they'd just given him more ammunition. The jail's attorney meeting room felt different that morning, sterile and unwelcoming as always, but now charged with anticipation. Renee Alvarez set up her laptop on the scratched table, while Calvin sat beside her, his brown overcoat wrinkled from the night in custody. The video call window opened, revealing Special Agent Dana Cho's composed face. "Agent Cho," Renee began, her voice steady, "thank you for making time on short notice." Dana Cho nodded once, her expression neutral but alert. "Walk me through the timeline, Ms. Alvarez." Renee shared her screen, displaying a folder structure riddled with error messages and access warnings. At approximately 11:42 p.m. last night, our secure drive containing authenticated evidence was compromised. The attack was precise, targeting only files related to tomorrow's hearing. She pulled up log files showing multiple unauthorized access attempts. The timestamps here were altered to create confusion about when files were originally created and modified. This wasn't a random hack. It required internal knowledge of both our system and the specific evidence we planned to present. Calvin watched as Renee methodically laid out the digital breadcrumbs. Access logs, error reports, time-stamped backups that now showed impossible creation dates. The technical details painted a clear picture of deliberate sabotage. "And the retaliatory arrest?" Dana Cho asked, her eyes scanning something off-screen. "Filed at 12:17 a.m., Renee replied, pulling up the police report. "The timing isn't subtle. They needed to discredit Mr. Brooks before we could expose the evidence tampering." Latrits. Sandra Pike joined the video call, her appearance causing a slight shift in Dana Cho's posture. Two professionals recognizing each other's authority. "Internal Affairs has noted several irregularities," Pike stated, her tone carefully neutral. "Access logs to our evidence servers show similar timestamp anomalies. When I attempted to investigate, I encountered significant resistance from within the department." "Resistance? How?" Dana Cho asked. "Delayed responses, missing documentation, convenient system maintenance windows." Pike's mouth tightened. "The walls here are thick, Agent Cho, and they're getting thicker by the hour." Renee opened another folder, this one containing screenshots of threatening messages. They're not just tampering with evidence, they're actively intimidating witnesses and creating a climate of fear. She played a voicemail. "We'll make you the example." The threat hung in the air, made worse by its casual delivery. Dana Cho leaned forward slightly, her first visible reaction. "Who else has copies of these threats?" "Multiple secure locations," Renee answered. "Joan Pritchard, our key witness, implemented a comprehensive backup system. She anticipated they might try to erase the truth." "Smart woman," Dana Cho commented. She typed something, then looked directly at Calvin. "Mr. Brooks, have you been informed of your rights regarding federal witness protection?" Calvin straightened. "Yes, ma'am, but I'm not hiding. This is my home, my community." Dana Cho nodded, respecting his choice without arguing. "Then let's discuss immediate steps. First, preservation orders for all relevant servers and systems. Any deletion or modification attempts after service will constitute federal obstruction." She outlined the process with surgical precision. Server imaging, chain of custody requirements, seizure warrants if necessary. The local department's autonomy was about to shrink considerably. "Latir, Pike," Dana Cho continued, "my team will need unrestricted access to your internal affairs files regarding Officers Klein and Maddox." "You'll have them within the hour," Pike replied, already making notes. The meeting continued with exact timelines and procedures. Calvin noticed how different this felt from local promises. No vague reassurances, just clear actions with federal weight behind them. By early afternoon, procedural pressure forced Calvin's release. He walked out of the jail into harsh sunlight. Renee beside him, Joan Pritchard waiting with a stack of printed logs held like scholarly evidence. Maya Whitfield approached with her camera, but kept a respectful distance. "Mr. Brooks, would you like to make a statement?" Calvin straightened his tie, took a deep breath, and spoke with quiet authority. "The truth doesn't vanish just because someone tries to delete it. Every threat, every false charge, every attempt to hide evidence, it all proves what they're afraid of: accountability." Joan stepped forward, holding up her meticulous records. "The timestamps don't lie," she said firmly. "And librarians don't lose things." A crowd had gathered, tension building, but Deacon Hal Mercer's presence helped maintain calm. He'd positioned church members strategically, creating a buffer of dignity and support. Their silent solidarity spoke volumes about community strength. Maya's cameraman captured it all: Calvin's composed determination, Joan's documented proof, the peaceful crowd standing witness. The story was shifting from a local arrest to something bigger: systematic abuse of power, meeting systematic exposure. The afternoon light slanted across the courthouse steps as Renee checked her phone. "Agent Cho's team is mobilizing," she said quietly. "The preservation orders are being prepared." Around them, the town felt different. The machine that had seemed so powerful was discovering its limitations. Federal jurisdiction cast long shadows, and those shadows were about to fall heavily on local badges that thought themselves untouchable. As evening approached, unmarked federal vehicles began appearing near the police department. They parked with quiet efficiency, engines off, lights dark. Their presence was both a promise and a warning. Justice might move slowly, but it moved with crushing weight once engaged. Inside the department, phones started ringing as news of federal involvement spread. The machine was about to learn that some things couldn't be buried with paperwork or intimidation. Sometimes the truth had teeth, and those teeth came with federal badges. The pre-dawn darkness shrouded the police department in shadows as 3 unmarked federal vehicles pulled into the parking lot. Special Agent Dana Cho stepped out first, her dark suit crisp despite the early hour. 6 other agents followed, carrying evidence collection equipment and document boxes. Lieutenant Sandra Pike waited by the front entrance, her face tight with professional tension. "Agent Cho, everything's ready." "Thank you, Lieutenant." Dana held up a thick stack of warrants. "Let's begin." The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as they entered. Night shift officers stared, suddenly very interested in their paperwork. Dana's team moved with practiced efficiency, splitting into predetermined groups. Chief Mallory Vance burst out of his office, his usual polish cracking around the edges. "This is completely unnecessary. We've been fully cooperative." "Chief Vance." Dana's voice cut through his bluster like a blade. She handed him the first warrant. "This authorizes immediate seizure of all body camera footage, including backup archives and metadata logs. The second covers dispatch recordings. The third," she continued dealing documents like cards, "encompasses server access records, internal affairs files, and all communications related to Calvin Brooks's arrest." Vance drew himself up. "Now wait just a minute. Any interference constitutes obstruction of a federal investigation." Dana's calm certainty made his authority seem small and local. "Your IT personnel will provide immediate access, or we'll remove the servers entirely." 2 agents were already heading toward the evidence room. Another team made their way to records. Vance watched his domain being methodically invaded by federal badges that outranked his protests. Officer Brent Klein arrived for his shift, freezing when he saw the activity. His face drained of color as Dana approached. "Officer Klein, your body camera footage from the Brooks arrest shows several inconsistencies with your written statement." She held up a tablet, displaying parallel timestamps. "Would you care to explain why you reported giving clear verbal warnings when the audio proves otherwise?" Klein's swagger evaporated. There must be some mistake in The footage timestamps are encrypted and authenticated, Dana continued. They can't be altered without leaving digital traces. Would you like to revise your statement now? In a corner office, 2 agents were imaging Officer Ross Maddox's phone. Text messages scrolled across their screens, conversations that treated resisting like a predetermined conclusion rather than an observed fact. "Look at this," one agent said, highlighting a message exchange from hours before the arrest. They were already discussing how to write it up. Dana examined the screen. The texts painted a clear picture of officers planning narrative instead of responding to reality. She made notes while her team continued extracting data. Outside the building, DA Trip Sloan held an impromptu press conference, his usual commanding tone slipping into defensive territory. "This is nothing but political theater," he declared to the gathered reporters. "A waste of federal resources to appease activists." Maya Whitfield cut in. "Mr. Sloan, how do you respond to the evidence of timestamp manipulation? The documented attempts to alter records? Those allegations are completely—" "I have the server logs right here." Maya held up her tablet. "The access times, the deletion attempts, the modified metadata. Numbers don't have politics, sir." Across town, Calvin sat at his kitchen table, hands wrapped around a coffee mug gone cold. Renee had been clear. Stay home. Stay calm. Let the system work for once. Joan Pritchard's car was parked across the street, her presence both comforting and strategic. Her security cameras recorded every vehicle that passed, every face that looked too long at Calvin's house. "Another patrol car," Joan texted. "Third time passed. I've got the plate numbers." Back at the station, Dana's team worked through the evidence room methodically. They found gaps in the body cam archives, conveniently timed deletions that left digital fingerprints. The dispatch recording showed selective preservation, with key moments during Calvin's arrest mysteriously absent. "Chief Vance," Dana called. "Could you explain why these specific time periods are missing?" Vance's polish had completely cracked. System maintenance, regular cleanup, during an active investigation, after preservation orders were issued. Dana made another note. "That's an interesting choice." The morning sun climbed higher as federal agents carried sealed evidence boxes to their vehicles. Each container held another piece of the truth: emails, text messages, altered reports, and digital traces of obstruction. Inside the department, phones kept ringing. Officers whispered in corners. The machine that had seemed so solid was being dismantled by people who couldn't be intimidated or deflected. Maya Whitfield stood outside, reporting live. Federal agents are executing multiple warrants following evidence of tampering and obstruction. This stems from the arrest of Calvin Brooks, who was charged with resisting arrest, despite video evidence showing full compliance. His call to a White House liaison triggered an investigation that has revealed what appears to be systematic manipulation of evidence. She turned to face another camera angle. "The timeline is crucial here. Mr. Brooks was arrested at gunpoint, charged with resisting, and when evidence supporting his innocence emerged, records began disappearing. The federal response was swift and coordinated. Near midday, Dana Cho emerged from the building carrying the final evidence box. She paused briefly, her face betraying no emotion as cameras turned toward her. "Agent Cho!" Maya called out. "What happens next?" Dana placed the box carefully in her vehicle. Her voice carried clearly in the sudden quiet. "The evidence suggests multiple instances of obstruction. That's now part of our investigation." She closed the car door with a solid thunk that seemed to echo across the parking lot. The machine had lost its grip on the truth, one sealed box at a time. The morning sun streamed through tall courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the packed gallery. Every wooden bench creaked with spectators, their whispers creating a tense undercurrent. Calvin Brooks sat beside Rene Alvarez at the defense table, his brown overcoat draped carefully over the back of his chair, blue tie perfectly straight. 3 thick binders sat before Rene, each one labeled with meticulous precision. Joan Pritchard's documentation system made legal. Behind them, Joan herself perched in the front row, her silver hair gleaming, her expression fixed and focused, like a librarian watching someone handle a rare book incorrectly. D.A. Trip Sloan swept in with his usual commanding presence, though his confidence seemed more performance than substance today. He arranged his materials with practiced flourish, barely glancing at the defense table. "All rise." The bailiff's voice cut through the murmurs. Judge Margaret Howard entered, her robes settling around her as she took her seat. Her eyes swept the courtroom, lingering briefly on the unusual number of federal agents present. Case number 2023 CR 789, State versus Calvin Brooks, the clerk announced. Hearing on defense motion to dismiss. Sloan rose smoothly. Your Honor, the state maintains these charges are properly filed and supported by... If I may, Your Honor? Renee's voice carried clear authority as she stood. She opened the first binder. We have evidence that directly contradicts not just the charge, but the integrity of the prosecution itself. The judge leaned forward. Proceed, Ms. Alvarez. Renee held up a USB drive in a sealed evidence bag. This contains Ms. Joan Pritchard's original doorbell camera footage showing Mr. Brooks's full compliance during the arrest. The timestamps are authenticated. She placed it on the evidence table. And this, she lifted another sealed bag, contains the department's attempted deletions of their own body camera footage recovered by federal forensics. Chief Mallory Vance shifted uncomfortably in his seat near the front. His polished facade couldn't quite hide his clenched jaw. Furthermore, Renee continued, opening the second binder, we have internal affairs documentation showing systematic attempts to alter evidence after preservation orders were issued. Lieutenant Sandra Pike's sworn statement details multiple instances of tampering. Sloan's face tightened. Your Honor, these allegations are completely... Not allegations, Mr. Sloan. Renee's tone could have chilled summer. Federal Agent Dana Cho's preliminary findings. She slid a document toward the bench. Note the timestamps of deletion attempts compared to when the White House liaison made initial contact. Maya Whitfield's pen moved rapidly across her notepad in the press section. Her camera operator focused on Sloan's increasingly rigid posture. Judge Howard examined the documents, her expression darkening. Mr. Sloan, are you telling me your office was unaware of this evidence tampering? Your Honor, we maintain that any technical issues were purely technical issues. Renee opened the third binder. Page 47 shows text messages between Officers Klein and Maddox discussing how to write up the resisting charge before they ever encountered Mr. Brooks. Page 53 contains their deleted drafts, showing how they constructed the narrative backward. The gallery's whispers grew louder. Linda Sutter, who had been sitting proudly near the front, began inching toward the door. And here, Renee lifted another document, is proof that dispatch recordings were selectively deleted after federal preservation orders. The gaps align perfectly with moments that would have exposed the false narrative. Judge Howard's patience visibly evaporated. Mr. Sloan, does the state wish to explain these discrepancies? Sloan stood, but his usual commanding presence seemed hollow. Your Honor, while there may be some procedural irregularities, the judge's voice could have etched steel. Ms. Alvarez has presented evidence of systematic tampering, false reporting, and obstruction of a federal investigation. This isn't irregular, Mr. Sloan. This is misconduct. The courtroom fell silent. Calvin sat perfectly still, his dignity a quiet rebuke to everyone who had tried to break it. "Your Honor," Renee stood again, "given the demonstrated pattern of evidence manipulation and false charging, we move for dismissal with prejudice. The state has proven it cannot be trusted to handle this case with integrity." Judge Howard studied the documents again, her expression severe. Several long moments passed before she looked up. "This court has seen many disturbing things," she began. "But the systematic attempt to destroy an innocent man's life through false charges, evidence tampering, and orchestrated harassment reaches a new level." She fixed Sloan with a hard stare. "The motion to dismiss is granted, with prejudice. Furthermore, I am ordering a full inquiry into misconduct related to this case." The gallery erupted in murmurs. Chief Vance's face had gone pale. Linda Sutter slipped out the back door. "Mr. Brooks." Judge Howard's voice softened slightly. "This court owes you an apology. You were subjected to a gross abuse of power, and then victimized again by attempts to cover it up." She gathered her papers. "This case is dismissed. Court is adjourned." The bang of the gavel seemed to echo. Calvin stood slowly, his composure unbroken. Joan Pritchard beamed from the gallery, her meticulous documentation vindicated. Maya Whitfield was already typing rapidly on her phone, breaking the news. Renee gathered their materials with careful precision. They walked out together, past Sloane's rigid back, past Chief Vance's crumbling authority, past all the power that had tried to grind Calvin down. The courthouse steps gleamed in the late morning sun. Calvin took his first deep breath as a truly free man, feeling the warmth on his face. "Now comes the consequences part," Renee said beside him. The afternoon sun beat down on the City Hall steps as cameras and microphones clustered around the makeshift podium. The media presence was unprecedented for their small town. Local stations mixed with regional affiliates, all drawn by the story of power finally facing consequences. Lieutenant Sandra Pike approached the microphones, her internal affairs badge catching the light. Her usual stern expression carried extra weight today. Behind her, Special Agent Dana Cho stood quietly observant, her federal authority adding gravity to every word about to be spoken. "Good afternoon," Pike began, her voice clear and uncompromising. "Following a thorough internal investigation, we have identified multiple serious policy violations within our department." She lifted a document. "These include false reporting, evidence tampering, and abuse of authority." The cameras clicked rapidly. Maya Whitfield stood front row center, her notebook ready, determined to capture every detail accurately. "Officers Brent Klein and Ross Maddox have been terminated effective immediately," Pike continued. "We are initiating decertification proceedings through the state board. This is not a resignation or transfer. This is a termination for cause." Calvin stood to the side with Renee Alvarez, watching his attackers' careers crumble in the sunlight. Joan Pritchard smiled tightly beside him, her meticulous documentation having helped build this moment. Deacon Hal Mercer placed a steady hand on Calvin's shoulder. "Additionally," Pike's voice cut through the murmurs, "we have referred our findings to federal authorities for review of potential civil rights violations." Special Agent Cho stepped forward, her presence commanding immediate attention. "The FBI's Civil Rights Division has opened a formal investigation into both the initial incident and subsequent attempts to obstruct justice through evidence tampering." From the crowd, someone called out, "What about Chief Vance?" As if on cue, Chief Mallory Vance emerged from City Hall, his uniform pristine, but his authority visibly diminished. He approached the podium with rehearsed dignity that fooled no one. "After careful consideration," he began, his politician's voice strained, "I believe it's in the department's best interest that I step down, effective immediately." The crowd's reaction was immediate. whispers, scattered applause, and the rapid fire of camera shutters capturing his fall. Maya Whitfield's pen moved swiftly, recording the careful language of a man trying to control his own disgrace. "Chief," Maya called out, "are you resigning because of the federal investigation?" Vance's polished smile cracked slightly. "I'm choosing to put the department first." "Are you anticipating criminal charges?" Another reporter interrupted. Before Vance could respond, Special Agent Cho spoke again. "The investigation will follow the evidence wherever it leads, regardless of rank or position." The former chief retreated, his attempt at dignity overshadowed by the reality of his failure. Calvin watched him go, remembering how Vance had dismissed his complaints with such casual authority just days ago. DA Tripp Sloan was notably absent, but his presence lingered in the announcement that followed. Littard Pike held up another document. "The State Bar Association has received a formal ethics complaint regarding the handling of this case," she stated. The complaint details multiple instances of prosecutorial misconduct, including pursuing charges despite clear evidence of innocence. From the crowd, Linda Sutter tried to slip away unnoticed, but Joan Pritchard's clear voice stopped her. "Ms. Sutter, would you like to explain your role in this incident?" The false complainant hurried away, no longer interested in the attention she'd once craved. Several older residents who had witnessed the original arrest nodded grimly, their silence finally breaking. Renee Alvarez stepped forward to address questions about civil proceedings. Mr. Brooks's rights were violated systematically and deliberately. We will ensure full accountability through every available legal channel. The questions flew rapid fire. Will there be a civil suit? What about the deleted evidence? Are other cases being reviewed? Renee handled each with precise clarity, never letting emotion overshadow facts. Calvin stood beside her, his dignity intact, his brown overcoat and blue tie a reminder of the ordinary day that power had tried to destroy. Deacon Hal Mercer spoke quietly to the community members gathering around them. "This isn't about revenge," he reminded them. "This is about making sure it doesn't happen again." Maya Whitfield's live coverage captured every detail. Former officers Klein and Maddox have been fired and face decertification, meaning they can never serve as law enforcement officers again. Chief Vance has resigned under pressure from mounting evidence of departmental misconduct. The DA's office faces serious ethics scrutiny. This isn't just about one incident. This is about systematic abuse, finally facing consequences. The afternoon sun began to sink, casting long shadows across the City Hall steps. Calvin's phone buzzed in his pocket. He stepped aside to answer it, listening intently as his employer spoke. "Mr. Brooks, we've reviewed the situation," his supervisor said. "We'd like you to return to work immediately. Your position is secure, and we'll process the back pay for your forced leave as soon as possible." Calvin thanked them quietly, his voice steady. When he rejoined the group, Joan was the first to notice his expression. "Good news?" she asked. "Job's back," he said simply. "With back pay." Renee nodded in satisfaction. One more piece of justice. The crowd began to disperse as the press conference wound down. Lieutenant Pike and Agent Cho gathered their documents, their work far from over, but the public message delivered. The consequences had landed, visible and undeniable, in the same public space where power had once assumed it was untouchable. Calvin straightened his tie, the simple gesture carrying the weight of restored dignity. The system had tried to break him with guns, badges, and false charges. Instead, truth had broken the system's presumption of immunity. Morning sunlight painted long shadows across the suburban street, where Calvin Brooks' ordeal had begun just days ago. He walked the same path, wearing the same brown overcoat and blue tie, but everything else had changed. The silence that greeted him now wasn't the false peace of suppression. It was the quiet of truth finally heard. Joan Pritchard walked beside him, her librarian's attention to detail having proved as powerful as any weapon. She carried a folder of documents, each page a brick in the wall of accountability they'd built. At 72, she moved with the satisfaction of someone who'd seen justice served not through shouting, but through relentless documentation. "Look at these gardens," Joan remarked, gesturing to the neat flower beds. Everyone so concerned with keeping up appearances, but nobody wanted to speak up when it mattered. Calvin nodded, noticing how neighbors peeked through curtains as they passed. Some waved hesitantly. Others quickly disappeared. The street had become a stage where power had tried to perform dominance and failed. Deacon Hal Mercer walked a few paces behind them, his presence both protective and dignified. He'd helped organize community support without turning Calvin's fight into a spectacle. Now he carried himself with the quiet pride of someone who'd chosen the right side of history. "The church board voted unanimously," Hal said, breaking the morning quiet. "We're offering space for the legal aid meetings. No charge." They approached the community room where Renee Alvarez waited, her briefcase bulging with the paperwork of victory. She'd already set up inside, chairs arranged in a circle, not rows, because this wasn't a performance. This was about building something lasting. Maya Whitfield arrived with her camera operator, setting up discreetly in the corner. She'd earned their trust by refusing to sensationalize the story, focusing instead on the cold facts that had brought down the powerful. More people filtered in than expected. Older residents who'd stayed quiet for years. Young parents worried about their children's future encounters with authority. Even a few retired officers who'd grown disgusted with the department's behavior. Calvin stood at the front, his posture straight but not stiff. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice carrying the same calm dignity that had frustrated Officer Klein's attempts to provoke him. "We're here to announce something concrete." Renee stepped forward, laying out the framework they'd developed. "We're establishing the Community Legal Aid Fund," she explained. "It's already received initial funding and commitments from multiple law firms. This isn't just about having lawyers, it's about having evidence preservation protocols, civilian oversight training, and rapid response support." Joan added her part. "We've developed a documentation system that any resident can use. Simple, clear steps for preserving evidence and establishing timelines. The kind of thing that makes it harder for truth to disappear." Through the window, Linda Sutter stood across the street, partially hidden behind a tree. She watched the gathering, her face a complex mix of emotions as she confronted the consequences of her false report. The power she'd thought she was wielding had backfired, exposing ugly truths about the system she'd tried to weaponize. Maya's camera rolled as Calvin explained the practical impact. The dismissal with prejudice means they can't try these charges again. The officer's firing and decertification means they can't just move to another department. The chief's resignation and the DA's ethics complaint show that enablers face consequences too. He paused, making eye contact with various community members. "But that's just punishment. We're here to build protection. The federal investigation is ongoing, and we've established channels to make sure evidence reaches the right authorities." Renee outlined specific protections. "We've secured commitments for civilian oversight boards with actual power. Body camera footage will have independent review. Complaint processes will have transparency requirements." The meeting continued with practical details: funding structures, reporting protocols, training schedules. This wasn't a victory rally, it was the serious work of building lasting change. "I wasn't resisting," Calvin stated firmly, his words carrying the weight of lived truth. "I was surviving. Now we're building protection so the next person doesn't stand alone." Heads nodded throughout the room. His words resonated with everyone who'd ever swallowed injustice, thinking silence meant safety. As the meeting wound down, people lingered to share their own stories. An elderly man described a traffic stop gone wrong. A young mother worried about her teenage son. Each story reinforced why they needed systematic change, not just individual justice. Outside, Linda Sutter had disappeared, but her impact remained. A cautionary tale about how quickly being concerned could become conscious cruelty. The afternoon sun was setting as Calvin finally headed home, his street now feeling different. Not perfect, not completely safe, but changed. Neighbors who'd hidden behind curtains now stepped onto porches to wave. The power dynamic had shifted. He climbed his front steps, keys jingling in his hand. The same porch where days ago he'd stepped out into what he thought was an ordinary morning. Now he understood. No morning was ordinary when you lived under systems that needed breaking. Inside his house, Calvin moved through his evening routine with deliberate calm. He hung his overcoat carefully, smoothing the brown fabric that had become symbolic of his dignity under pressure. His fingers worked the knot of his blue tie, the same one he'd worn when they'd tried to break him. Standing before his hallway mirror, Calvin slipped the tie from his collar and hung it neatly. A simple action that carried the weight of victory earned, not granted. Each crease and fold represented a choice to stand firm, to document truth, to build protection rather than seek revenge. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please like the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.